The Indus Valley Enigma, a civilization without war or kings. In the arid plains straddling modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, archaeologists have unearthed the remnants of one of the most perplexing lost civilizations the world has ever known, the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished from roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE. At its peak, it spanned over 1 million square kilometers, encompassing more than 1,000 cities and towns, including the now famous urban centers of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. These were not primitive settlements, but meticulously planned metropolises, featuring grid-patterned streets, advanced drainage systems, indoor plumbing, and standardized brick sizes, engineering feats that would not be matched in Europe for another 2 millennia. Yet despite its sophistication, scale, and longevity, the Indus Valley civilization vanished almost without a trace, leaving behind no definitive records of its rulers, no monumental temples, no depictions of warfare, and, most baffling of all, an undeciphered script that has stymied linguists for over a century. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, whose histories are etched in stone through royal decrees and conquest narratives, the Indus people left no statues of kings, no grand tombs, and no known military fortifications. Their artifacts suggest a society deeply attuned to trade, ritual cleanliness, and perhaps even egalitarian governance. But how could such a vast, complex civilization disappear so completely? Mainstream theories once pointed to an Aryan invasion as the cause, but modern genetic and archaeological evidence largely debunks this colonial-era hypothesis. Instead, scholars now lean toward environmental catastrophe, shifting monsoon patterns, the drying up of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system, possibly the mythical Sarasvati River, or a series of devastating floods that may have forced mass migration eastward into the Ganges basin. Yet its speed and silence remain anomalous. Entire cities were abandoned with tools still in place, food stores untouched, and streets swept clean as if the population simply walked away overnight. No skeletal remains indicate mass warfare or epidemic. The absence of any successor culture that clearly evolved from Indus traditions deepens the mystery. Did its knowledge dissolve into oral traditions later absorbed by Vedic society? Or was its cultural DNA erased so thoroughly that we may never recover its voice? The undeciphered script, comprising roughly 400 unique symbols found on seals, pottery, and copper tablets, holds the key, but without a Rosetta Stone equivalent, it remains a locked door. Some researchers speculate the language may be related to Dravidian tongues still spoken in southern India, while others believe it represents an entirely lost linguistic branch. Until that code is cracked, the Indus Valley civilization stands as a haunting mirror to our own, advanced, interconnected, and yet vulnerable to forces it could not control, leaving behind only silent bricks and unreadable whispers in clay.
2. The mysterious disappearance of the Anasazi, echoes in the canyon walls. High atop the mesas and deep within the labyrinthine canyons of the American Southwest, spanning what is now the Four Corners region where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, lie the haunting ruins of the Ancestral Puebloans, commonly known as the Anasazi. Flourishing between 900 and 1300 CE, this civilization constructed some of the most sophisticated cliff dwellings and great houses on the North American continent, including the iconic Pueblo Bonito at Chaco Canyon, a multi-story complex with over 600 rooms aligned with celestial precision to solstices and lunar cycles. Their society was advanced in astronomy, agriculture, and long-distance trade, exchanging turquoise, pottery, and macaw feathers with cultures as distant as Mesoamerica. Yet by the late 13th century, nearly every major Anasazi site was abruptly abandoned. Entire communities vanished from landscapes they had inhabited for centuries, leaving behind fully stocked granaries, unfinished construction projects, and ceremonial kivas filled with sacred objects. The silence that followed was absolute. Unlike other collapsed societies that left behind records of invasion or internal strife, the Anasazi departure appears deliberate, swift, and total. Early archaeologists attributed the exodus to warfare or societal collapse, pointing to evidence of burned structures and human remains bearing signs of violence at sites like Cowboy Wash. But more recent research suggests a confluence of environmental and spiritual crises. Tree ring data reveals a devastating Great Drought from 1276 to 1299, a 23-year dry spell so severe it would have crippled maize agriculture, the bedrock of Anasazi's subsistence. However, drought alone fails to explain why they never returned once rainfall patterns normalized. Oral histories from modern Pueblo peoples, including the Hopi and Zuni, who consider themselves descendants of the Anasazi, offer a different narrative, that their ancestors left not out of desperation, but in fulfillment of sacred prophecy. As to Hopi tradition, the people had fallen out of balance with the natural and spiritual world. Their departure was a ritual act of purification, a return to the fourth world after violating cosmic laws. This perspective reframes abandonment not as collapse, but as transformation. Yet even this explanation leaves gaps. Why were some sites, like Mesa Verde's Cliff Palace, sealed with ritual deposits before being vacated? Why did migration routes lead not just to new farmlands, but to defensible mesa tops, suggesting fear of unknown threats? And what of the so-called Chaco phenomenon, a centralized, possibly theocratic system that coordinated construction across hundreds of miles using astronomical knowledge far beyond subsistence needs? Was Chaco a spiritual capital whose collapse triggered a cascading loss of faith across the region? Modern LiDAR surveys have revealed extensive road networks and signal towers connecting distant settlements, hinting at a level of social cohesion that makes total societal disintegration even more puzzling. Today, the canyon walls echo with unanswered questions. The Anasazi did not vanish into thin air. They re-emerged as the diverse Pueblo nations, but the sudden, synchronized abandonment of their heartland remains one of North America's most enigmatic cultural ruptures, a ghost chapter in human history where climate, belief, and perhaps unseen social pressures converged to erase a civilization from its own homeland.
3. The Lost Kingdom of Aksum, when a superpower faded into myth. Rising from the highlands of northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, the Kingdom of Aksum dominated trade routes between the Roman Empire, India, and the African interior from the 1st to the 8th century CE. At its zenith, Aksum was one of the 4 great powers of the ancient world, named alongside Rome, Persia, and China by the Persian prophet Mani, and minted its own gold coinage, a rare distinction in sub-Saharan Africa. Its towering obelisks, some exceeding 30 meters in height, were engineering marvels carved from single blocks of granite and erected without mortar, serving as funerary markers for an elite whose wealth rivaled that of pharaonic Egypt. Aksum controlled the Red Sea port of Adulis, funneling ivory, gold, exotic animals, and enslaved people to the Mediterranean, while importing silk, spices, and glassware. Crucially, it was the first major kingdom to officially adopt Christianity as a state religion under King Izana in the 4th century, decades before Rome, and became the spiritual nucleus of Ethiopian Orthodoxy, claiming descent from the biblical union of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Yet by the 10th century, Aksum had all but disappeared from historical records. Its grand stelae lay toppled, its cities depopulated, its ports abandoned. Unlike Rome, whose fall was chronicled in real time, Aksum's decline was silent, undocumented, and strangely total. What caused a maritime and agricultural superpower, with access to monsoon winds for oceanic trade and fertile highland soils for surplus crops, to collapse so completely that its own successors barely understood its origins? Traditional narratives blamed Islamic expansion in the 7th century, which allegedly severed Aksum's access to the Mediterranean markets. But archaeological evidence shows Adulis remained active well into the 8th century, and Aksumite trade with India persisted even after Arab dominance in the Red Sea. A more compelling theory involves environmental degradation. Centuries of deforestation for construction and charcoal production likely triggered catastrophic soil erosion, diminishing agricultural yields in a region already vulnerable to rainfall variability. Sediment cores from nearby lakes reveal increased erosion layers coinciding with Aksum's decline. Simultaneously, the rise of rival inland kingdoms, particularly the Zagwe dynasty, which later built the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, may have shifted political and economic gravity away from Aksum's highland core. Yet the abruptness of the abandonment remains unsettling. The city's sacred reservoir, known as the Meda, was deliberately filled with rubble. Royal tombs were sealed, and the Ark of the Covenant, allegedly housed in Aksum's Church of St. Mary of Zion, was shrouded in secrecy so absolute that only one guardian is permitted to view it to this day. Ethiopian chronicles, such as the 14th century Kabra Nagast, mythologize Aksum's past but say little about its fall, as if the kingdom's disappearance was too traumatic or too sacred to record plainly. Modern excavations reveal that after the 8th century, no new monumental architecture was built, and urban life contracted into scattered rural hamlets. The once cosmopolitan capital became a pilgrimage site, its grandeur fossilized in stone and legend. Aksum's vanishing act challenges assumptions about African state formation. It proves complex, literate, globally connected civilizations thrived south of the Sahara long before European contact. Yet it also demonstrates how fragile such systems could be when ecological, economic, and spiritual equilibria collapsed in unison. Today, as climate pressures intensify across the Horn of Africa, Aksum stands as a stark parable, a warning carved not in books, but in toppled obelisks and silent fields.
4. The Forgotten Empire of the Minoans, Catastrophe Beneath the Waves. Long before Athens claimed intellectual supremacy, or Sparta forged its warrior ethos, the island of Crete hosted Europe's first advanced civilization, the Minoans, whose influence radiated across the Aegean from roughly 2700 to 1450 BCE. Named after the mythical king Minos by archaeologist Arthur Evans, who unearthed the sprawling palace of Kronos in 1900, the Minoans built a thalassocracy, or sea empire, powered by maritime trade rather than conquest. Their cities lacked fortifications, their art celebrated nature and ritual dance rather than warfare, and their writing systems, Cretan hieroglyphics and later Linear A, remain undeciphered to this day. Frescoes depict elegant women with exposed breasts participating in public ceremonies, bull-leaping acrobats defying gravity, and fleets of sleek ships laden with olive oil, wine, and saffron. This was a society of abundance, aesthetics, and apparent gender parity, at least among the elite. Yet around 1450 BCE, Minoan civilization collapsed with shocking suddenness. Palaces across Crete, Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros were destroyed by fire, and within a generation their culture was absorbed, overwritten, or erased by the Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland, who introduced Linear B, an early form of Greek, and a warrior-based social order. But what caused this abrupt transition? For decades, historians blamed Mycenaean invasion, citing Linear B tablets found in Kronos and a shift in burial practices.
However, evidence of widespread warfare is conspicuously absent. The destruction layers show no signs of mass casualties or siege weaponry. A far more plausible culprit lies to the north, the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, Thera erupted in one of the most violent volcanic events in human history, estimated at 100 times the force of Mount St. Helens, triggering tsunamis over 100 meters high that slammed into Crete's northern coast. Ashfall blanketed the eastern Mediterranean, disrupting agriculture and trade for years. Yet the Minoans endured for another 150 years after the eruption, suggesting resilience rather than immediate collapse. This gap has fueled intense debate. Did the eruption merely weaken the Minoans, making them vulnerable to Mycenaean opportunism? Or did internal factors, economic strain, religious upheaval, or dynastic collapse finish what nature began? Intriguingly, Minoan religious iconography centers on a mother goddess and sacred horns, with no evidence of a male warrior pantheon until the Mycenaean period. The shift may represent not just political conquest, but a fundamental ideological replacement. Moreover, recent seabed surveys near Crete have uncovered submerged structures that some researchers believe could be remnants of pre-eruption coastal settlements wiped out by tsunamis, hinting at a lost Minoan landscape beneath the waves. The undeciphered Linear A script, used for administrative records, holds the potential to reveal whether the Minoans spoke an early form of Greek, unlikely, or a pre-Indo-European language related to Etruscan or Basque. Until then, their voices remain locked in clay. The Minoan collapse stands as a haunting example of how a non-militaristic, trade-dependent society can vanish not with a bang of swords, but with a silent retreat of its cultural identity, swallowed first by ocean, then by history. 5. The Vanished Cities of the Khmer Empire. Jungle Secrets of Angkor. In the dense jungles of modern-day Cambodia, the ruins of Angkor sprawled across 400 square kilometers, an urban expanse larger than modern Paris at its height. From the 9th to the 15th century CE, the Khmer Empire ruled Southeast Asia with divine authority, its god-kings erecting temple mountains like Angkor Wat and Bayon as earthly representations of Mount Meru, the cosmic axis of Hindu and later Buddhist cosmology. At its peak under Jayavarman VII in the late 12th century, Angkor supported a population estimated between 750,000 and 1 million people, sustained by the most sophisticated hydraulic engineering system of the pre-industrial world, a network of reservoirs, bares, canals, and moats that managed monsoon floods and stored water for dry season irrigation. Yet, by the early 16th century, this metropolis was largely abandoned, its stone corridors reclaimed by strangler figs and silence. European explorers in the 19th century, like Henri Mouhot, marveled at Angkor as a lost civilization, but the truth is more complex. The Khmer didn't vanish, they migrated, and their descendants formed the backbone of modern Cambodian society. The real mystery lies not in their disappearance, but in the sudden abandonment of their capital. What forced a people to leave the heart of their spiritual and political universe? Early theories blamed Siamese invasions from Ayutthaya, which sacked Angkor in 1431. But inscriptions and archaeological evidence suggest the city was already in decline decades before the raid. A more compelling explanation lies beneath the surface, literally. Core samples from the massive West Bare reveal that prolonged droughts in the 14th century, followed by intense monsoons in the 15th, overwhelmed the very water infrastructure that had enabled Khmer prosperity. The elaborate system, once a marvel of sustainability, became a liability. Silt-choked canals, reservoirs bred mosquitoes, spreading malaria, and erratic rainfall made rice cultivation unreliable. Simultaneously, the empire's religious transformation from state-sponsored Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism undermined the divine authority of the god-king.
Theravada emphasized individual enlightenment over royal cults, decentralizing power and redirecting resources from monumental temple building to local monasteries. Economic shifts also played a role. Maritime trade routes began bypassing inland Angkor in favor of coastal ports like Phnom Penh and Mekong Delta hubs, aligning with the rise of global sea commerce. LiDAR imaging in the last decade has revolutionized our understanding of Angkor, revealing that Angkor was not just a ceremonial center, but a vast, low-density urban network connected by roads and waterways, making its abandonment even more staggering. Why would such a resilient, sprawling society abandon its core? The answer appears to be systemic fragility, an over-engineered, top-down system that could not adapt to climate volatility and ideological change. Unlike Rome, which fragmented but left legal and linguistic legacies, Angkor's collapse was spatial and symbolic. The physical seat of cosmic order was deemed no longer viable. Yet, the Khmer spirit endured, not in stone, but in the rice fields, villages, and temples of everyday life. The jungle did not erase them. It simply covered the stage after the final act.
6. The riddle of the Olmec, Mesoamerica's mother civilization that faded without a trace. Long before the pyramids of Teotihuacan or the feathered serpents of Chichen Itza, a mysterious culture emerged in the swampy lowlands of southern Mexico around 1500 BCE, the Olmecs, often hailed as Mesoamerica's mother civilization. Flourishing along the Gulf Coast, in what is now Veracruz and Tabasco, the Olmecs pioneered hallmarks of later Mesoamerican societies: monumental architecture, the ritual ball game, complex calendrics, and the earliest known writing system in the Americas. But they are best known for their colossal stone heads, 17 discovered so far, each carved from basalt boulders quarried over 100 kilometers away, weighing up to 50 tons, and depicting individuals with broad noses, thick lips, and enigmatic expressions that some, controversially, associate with African or even extraterrestrial features. Mainstream archaeology rejects such fringe claims, emphasizing that the heads represent local rulers adorned in ritual ball player gear. Yet their sheer scale and the logistics of transport remain staggering for a society without wheels, metal tools, or draft animals. The Olmec heartland centered on three major sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. San Lorenzo, the earliest, was abruptly abandoned around 900 BCE. Its monuments were deliberately mutilated, altars smashed, sculptures decapitated, and colossal heads buried or repositioned as if in ritual decommissioning. La Venta rose in its place, only to suffer a similar fate by 400 BCE, its sacred precincts burned and ceremonial offerings systematically destroyed. By 300 BCE, the Olmec cultural footprint had vanished. Unlike successor civilizations that absorbed and transformed Olmec traditions, the collapse appears total. No clear political or dynastic continuity links them to the Maya or Zapotec. What caused this repeated, self-inflicted erasure? Environmental factors loom large. The region's rivers frequently shifted course, flooding settlements or cutting off trade routes. Pollen and sediment analyses reveal that intensive agriculture may have led to soil exhaustion and deforestation, triggering ecological strain. Yet the pattern of deliberate monument destruction suggests more than environmental stress. It points to internal upheaval, possibly a revolt against priestly or royal elites whose authority was tied to sacred spaces. Intriguingly, Olmec iconography is dominated by hybrid supernatural beings, weird jaguars, dragon-like serpents, implying a cosmology centered on shamanic transformation and cosmic duality. If droughts or floods were interpreted as divine punishment for ritual failure, the entire ideological foundation of Olmec leadership could have crumbled overnight. Moreover, recent discoveries of early writing at San Andreas,
a site contemporaneous with Olmec centers, suggest literacy may have been used for elite record-keeping, yet no Olmec codices survive, and their script remains undeciphered. Without texts, their language, governance, and self-conception are lost. The Olmec legacy endures indirectly. Their calendar system, maize-centered agriculture, and religious motifs permeate later Mesoamerican cultures. But as a distinct society, they disappeared as mysteriously as they arose, leaving behind only stone faces staring blindly from the jungle, silent witnesses to a civilization that built the blueprint for a continent, then walked away from its own creation.
7. The collapse of the Mycenaean world, Bronze Age apocalypse in the Aegean. Around 1200 BCE, the glittering palaces of the Mycenaean Greeks, perched high on citadels like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, were consumed by fire, their archives of clay tablets shattered, their trade networks severed, and their literate bureaucracy erased. Within a single generation, the dominant power of the late Bronze Age Aegean collapsed into ruin, plunging the region into a dark age that would last nearly 4 centuries. Unlike gradual declines seen elsewhere, the Mycenaean collapse was violent, abrupt, and nearly total. Linear B tablets, deciphered in the 1950s as an early form of Greek, reveal a highly centralized, redistributive economy managed by palace scribes who meticulously recorded livestock, olive oil, and chariot wheels. Yet these same tablets, in their final entries, betray mounting desperation. Watchtowers are reinforced, coastal settlements are abandoned, and cryptic references appear to watchers by the sea. Then silence. No new tablets, no monumental construction, no international correspondence. The Mycenaean world simply stopped writing and governing its own history. For decades, the collapse was blamed on the enigmatic Sea Peoples, a confederation of marauders mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions who swept through the eastern Mediterranean, toppling the Hittite Empire and threatening Ramses III's Egypt. But while the Sea Peoples may have delivered the final blow, modern archaeology reveals a system already teetering on the edge. Palatial economies were rigidly hierarchical, dependent on constant tribute and long-distance trade in tin for bronze, and luxury goods. When trade routes faltered, possibly due to piracy, climate shifts, or the collapse of partner states like Ugarit, the entire system unraveled. Drought evidence from lake sediments in Greece and Turkey points to a prolonged dry period between 1250 and 1100 BCE, which would have devastated rain-fed agriculture, sparking famine and social unrest. Simultaneously, internal revolts may have targeted the warrior aristocracy, whose power was symbolized by tholos tombs and gold death masks like that of Agamemnon. Excavations at sites like Thebes show signs of deliberate destruction of elite quarters, suggesting class warfare rather than external invasion. Perhaps most telling is the complete loss of literacy. After the palaces burned, Linear B vanished, and Greeks would not write again until adopting the Phoenician alphabet in the 8th century BCE. This wasn't merely political collapse, it was cultural amnesia. Oral traditions preserved fragments in the Homeric epics, where the Trojan War serves as a mythologized memory of a lost heroic age. But the administrative, religious, and technological knowledge of the Mycenaeans evaporated. The collapse also triggered mass migrations. Greek speakers fled to Cyprus and the Anatolian coast, while the Greek mainland's population plummeted by as much as 75%. When civilization re-emerged centuries later in archaic Greece, it was decentralized, city-state-based, and philosophically oriented, utterly unlike the autocratic palace kingdoms of its ancestors.
The Mycenaean fall stands as one of history's clearest examples of systemic fragility, a society so optimized for control that it could not adapt to disruption, leaving behind only tombs, tablets, and the ghosts of a language that spoke its final word in ash.
8. The deserted glory of Cahokia, North America's forgotten metropolis. Rising from the floodplains near present-day St. Louis, Missouri, Cahokia was the largest pre-Columbian settlement north of Mexico, a sprawling urban center that, at its peak around 1050 CE, housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people, rivaling contemporary London in population. Dominated by Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the Americas, rising 100 feet and covering 14 acres, Cahokia was the heart of a vast cultural and trade network stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. Its inhabitants, part of the Mississippian culture, engineered a landscape of over 120 mounds, grand plazas, and wooden palisades aligned with celestial events like the solstices and the 18.6-year lunar cycle. They cultivated maize on an industrial scale, crafted intricate copper ornaments and shell beads, and practiced rituals that sometimes involved human sacrifice, as evidenced by mass graves at Mound 72, containing over 50 young women and elite individuals buried with exotic goods. Yet, by 1350 CE, Cahokia was completely abandoned. Its mounds stood empty, its fields overgrown, its influence erased. Unlike the Anasazi, whose descendants maintain cultural continuity, Cahokia's collapse appears absolute. No major successor city arose to claim its legacy. What caused North America's only true city to vanish so completely? Early theories pointed to warfare or invasion, citing the construction of a 2-mile-long defensive palisade around the central precinct after 1100 CE. But the palisade's design, more symbolic than practical, and the absence of battlefield remains weaken this argument. More compelling is environmental stress. Pollen records and sediment cores show that a period of intense flooding around 1100 to 1200 CE, followed by severe droughts, disrupted maize agriculture, the foundation of Cahokia's surplus economy. Deforestation for construction and fuel likely exacerbated erosion and reduced the land carrying capacity. Social unrest may have followed. Evidence of burned elite residences and ritual structures suggests internal conflict, possibly a rejection of the priestly class whose authority was tied to celestial prediction and mound visiting. Cahokia's power was ideological as much as political. Its rulers claimed divine sanction through alignment with cosmic order. When crops failed and rivers turned unpredictable, that legitimacy may have collapsed. Furthermore, Cahokia's growth was partly fueled by immigration, creating a multi-ethnic society vulnerable to fragmentation under stress. As conditions worsened, populations likely dispersed to smaller, more resilient villages along tributary rivers, a process of ruralization rather than extinction. Yet the speed and totality of abandonment remained striking. By the time Europeans arrived in the 17th century, local tribes like the Illinois Confederation viewed Cahokia's mounds as ancient and mysterious, with no oral tradition linking them to their own ancestors. The site was so thoroughly forgotten that French missionaries named it after a completely unrelated Illiniwak tribe. Only in the 20th century did archaeology reveal Cahokia's true scale, forcing a radical reassessment of pre-Columbian North America, not as a continent of scattered nomads, but as home to a complex, urbanized society that rose and fell centuries before European contact. Cahokia's silence is not the silence of disappearance, but of erasure, its story buried not just in earth, but in the assumptions of history itself.
9. The Ghosts of the Nabateans, Petra's Silent Caravans. Carved directly into rose-red sandstone cliffs in the arid valleys of southern Jordan, the city of Petra stands as one of the most visually arresting archaeological sites on Earth, a testament to the ingenuity of the Nabateans, a nomadic Arab people who transformed themselves into master traders, hydraulic engineers, and urban planners between the 4th century BCE and the 2nd century CE. Controlling the incense, spice, and silk routes that linked Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, the Nabateans amassed immense wealth without building a traditional empire. Instead, they operated as a commercial confederation, leveraging Petra's natural fortress-like geography and their unparalleled knowledge of desert water management to dominate long-distance trade. Their city, hidden within a narrow gorge known as the Sikh, featured elaborate tombs, temples, and a Roman-style theater, all hewn from living rock. Crucially, they engineered an astonishing network of dams, cisterns, terracotta pipelines, and flash flood diversion channels that turned a water-scarce desert into a livable metropolis capable of supporting tens of thousands. Yet, by the 4th century CE, Petra was largely abandoned. Its grand facades silent, its waterworks dry, its role in history diminished to myth, so thoroughly forgotten that it remained unknown to the Western world until 1812, when Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt disguised himself as a Bedouin to rediscover it. The Nabatean disappearance defies simple explanation. Unlike civilizations crushed by invasion, Petra was peacefully absorbed into the Roman Empire in 106 CE, after Emperor Trajan annexed the Nabatean kingdom as the province of Arabia Petraea. Initially, Roman rule brought prosperity. New roads like the Via Nova Trajana bypassed the old caravan trails, integrating Petra into a broader imperial economy. But this integration proved a double-edged sword. As sea trade via the Red Sea and the Nile grew more efficient, overland caravan routes lost relevance. Petra's economic raison d'etre evaporated. Compounding this, a series of devastating earthquakes struck the region in 363 CE and again in 551 CE, toppling buildings, cracking aqueducts, and rendering the delicate water infrastructure inoperable. Without the Nabateans' specialized knowledge to maintain it, the system failed. Excavations reveal that post-earthquake repairs were haphazard, suggesting a loss of technical expertise or population decline. By the Byzantine era, Petra had shrunk to a small Christian community centered around a few churches, one of which contained papyri detailing land disputes, among the last written records from the city. After the Islamic conquest in the 7th century, Petra vanished from administrative records entirely. The site's remoteness, coupled with shifting trade and pilgrimage routes, left it to the Bedouin, who preserved local knowledge but left no monumental legacy. The Nabateans themselves left no native histories. What we know comes from Greek and Roman accounts that often dismissed them as mere bandits or desert traders. Their language, a form of Aramaic written in a distinctive script, appears only on tombs and inscriptions, offering no narratives, only names and dedications. The true tragedy is not that Petra fell, but that the Nabatean worldview, their synthesis of Arab, Hellenistic, and Near Eastern traditions, their reverence for water as sacred, their identity as guardians of the desert's hidden veins, was never recorded by its own people. Their civilization didn't collapse in fire or conquest. It dissolved, quietly, like sand in the wind, leaving behind only stone echoes of a people who once made the desert bloom.
10. The erased legacy of the Sogdians, Silk Road masters lost to time. In the heart of Central Asia, nestled between the Amu Darya and Sur Darya rivers in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, flourished the Sogdian civilization, a mercantile powerhouse that dominated the Silk Road from the 4th to the 8th century CE. Though never a unified empire, the Sogdians were a network of independent city-states, Samarkand, Bukhara, Panjikent, whose influence stretched from the markets of Chang'an in China to the courts of Constantinople. They were the ultimate cultural intermediaries, Zoroastrian by heritage, but fluent in Buddhist, Manichaean, Nestorian Christian, and later Islamic traditions.
writing in a script derived from Aramaic, yet translating Sanskrit sutras and Chinese poetry, trading silk, silver, and slaves while spreading ideas, art, and technologies across continents. Their homes in Panjikent reveal vibrant murals depicting epic tales from Iran and India, banquets with lutes and wine, and diplomatic processions, a visual encyclopedia of Eurasian exchange. Yet by the 10th century, the Sogdian language had vanished, their cities absorbed into new Islamic empires, and their identity all but erased from historical memory. The cause was not gradual assimilation, but sudden, violent transformation. In 751 CE, at the Battle of Talas River, Arab Abbasid forces defeated a Tang Chinese army, securing Muslim dominance over Central Asia. But the true death knell came decades earlier, the systematic Arab conquest of Sogdiana beginning in the 710s, led by generals like Qutayba ibn Muslim. Unlike tolerant Persian or Chinese overlords, the early Islamic caliphates imposed jizya, poll taxes on non-Muslims, and actively encouraged conversion. Sogdian fire temples were razed, their elite co-opted or displaced, and their trade networks redirected through Muslim-controlled hubs. Crucially, the Sogdians' lack of political unity made resistance impossible. They were merchants, not soldiers. Their identity was portable, not territorial. When Islamic Arabic became the lingua franca of commerce and administration, Sogdian script and speech faded within generations. Yet their legacy endured invisibly. Sogdian words entered Persian and Turkish. Their accounting methods shaped Islamic finance, and their role as translators preserved Greek and Indian knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages. The final blow came with the Mongol invasions of the 13th century, which devastated Central Asian cities so thoroughly that even memory fragmented. When European travelers like Marco Polo later passed through Samarkand, they encountered a Persian-speaking Islamic world with little recollection of its Sogdian past. It wasn't until the 20th century, through discoveries like the ancient letters found near Dunhuang, China, written in Sogdian by merchants stranded in 313 CE, that scholars realized the extent of their influence. These letters, full of personal anguish and commercial detail, reveal a diaspora already globalized 1,700 years ago. The Sogdians didn't vanish due to famine, plague, or environmental collapse. They were overwritten by history itself, absorbed, converted, and linguistically extinguished by the very systems of connectivity they helped create. Their story is a haunting reminder that the most influential civilizations are not always the ones that build the tallest monuments, but those who weave the threads between worlds, only to disappear when the tapestry is complete.